One of the most unspoken factor in our life is weather. When the weather changes, we change what we wear. And we have to understand that when the weather changes, you have to approach things differently. And I think the weather in the global financial landscape seems to be changing. And from what could be called as an environment of interest rate hike, you are going to an environment of interest rate decline. Interest rates are the central theme which tend to impact two large clusters always, financials and commodities. The strange part here is that even though interest rates are coming down, commodities are coming down, and when interest rates they typically come down, financials and especially wholesale borrowing companies they tend to outperform. And when interest rates globally they come down, that act as a pivot for flows to come back into Indian markets. Now, why am I talking macro when Anisha has just flagged off a point on banks? The reason why I'm flagging it off is because the turn in macro is also a function. The turn in banks is also a function of what is happening in global macros. And globally, if yields they come down, foreign institutional investors will be forced to come back to emerging markets and a performing market like India. Within that, banks becomes the first port of call, and banks have been suffering not because of earnings or NPAs or growth concerns in the economy. They've been suffering. Why? Because of FI selling. And if FI selling comes down, which it should, because macros are now favorable for emerging markets like India, because commodities are down and rates are coming down, then banks they tend to outperform. So we'll get into the micros of the banks, which is a good bank and which is a bad bank, but macros and financials and commodities are two sectors which initially get deeply influenced by macros and then micros later on. And I think the macro, like I said, the weather is changing, and that is the most unspoken aspect of life. That weather changes, you dress differently. If the environment of interest rate is changing, you invest differently. That is very simple.